All right, so the idea with this session is I'm going to start with GitHub from the very beginning and go through each week and do more and more like GitHub specific things. And let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Let's get right into it. All right, so if you have not been living under a rock, you probably have heard of GitHub. It's probably one of the most popular uh, places to source your code, or it is the most popular actually to put your source code, and it's got a lot of really cool features as well. So I'm going to start with the concept of organization in GitHub. So you can see here I'm a member of a few different organizations. I have my own personal account. I have some other universities. I have my own organizations here as well. And so the idea with an organization is you could have lots of different projects associated and do group level management. Probably most people care about the individual account though with GitHub to start with. And a couple things I'll show you about individual accounts that's kind of fun is if you go to here and you go to your profile, one of the things that's cool about it is you can have essentially like a web page or like a profile account where you put in everything inside of GitHub. And so in this particular repository, if we click on it, you can see that I actually set up my own name as a repo. And then inside of here, I have a README file, and then I can just put stuff inside. And I think it's a good idea to, if you're a developer and you want to let people know about the kind of work that you're doing, is to build a list of things for people to look at. And notice you can use like really cool emojis and even put like YouTube videos and have them auto updated. And so that's what I do in my profile is I list this information here. I guess a couple other things to point out about GitHub to start with is that under settings here, a lot of the stuff you want to do is going to be located. So this is where you would add other collaborators, potentially set up webhooks or environments, code spaces for doing development, pages if you wanted to set up some kind of a page. Also security. So if you wanted to do deployment keys or code security, you have all these different options here. So I would say those are probably the main things to point out with initially when you're using GitHub. Now I'm going to shift over to a different organization really quick. And if I go here to this link and I go to this organization, I would say the first thing that someone should do when they're starting with GitHub is to basically use code spaces and set up a repo. I would say that's maybe the first thing to do. So let's actually create a template or a new repository for this. So we'll say here, and we'll call this GitHub template. The idea here is that you can actually create templates that you can pull other projects from. So I think that's a great idea when you're starting to develop code, is to first basically create a template that makes it really easy to do stuff. And we can put here that we could say like a sample template for GitHub best practices, like that. And we'll make it public. Always important to add a README file. This is where you would keep your main documentation. And then this is critical when you're first setting up a GitHub project, is to do a git ignore. And you want to pick one that is specific to your language. So you can see there's a bunch of different languages inside of here. Since I use a lot of Python, you can go through here and we can say git ignore Python. And then for a license, you can put what kind of license you want. I usually use Creative Commons since a lot of the stuff I do is content related. So it just essentially says, just let people know that I was the person that created this. Now, if you go to GitHub here, and we take a look at this, what we can do is now start building up more things for our GitHub template. So I would say the first thing that I would start out with would be to create a code space. So the code spaces, they're a workspace in the cloud, and I would say there's almost no reason to not use them. And especially when you're getting started, like it's a really great idea to just use code spaces to move quickly on building stuff. So what I'm going to do here really quick is clean up uh, inside, and we can actually go through here and clean up a few of these like that. Um, clean up a little bit here. There we go. And then now that we've cleaned those up, I can go back to my template here. There we go. And refresh it and then make a code space. There we go. So the idea here with a code space is that you can pick the kinds of machines. If you're not using the free tier, there's going to be a cost associated with them. And notice here's the different options. We have first new with new options. Another one is called configure dev container. This allows you to customize the Docker runtime. You can also set up pre-builds, which allows your setup actually to be built automatically. And then you could also manage code spaces. So this is the code spaces stuff. The other thing to point out is that there are 3 different ways to clone the repo if you're not going to use code spaces. First one is HTTPS. So if you just want to like copy some code and basically never write it back to GitHub, this is a reasonable way to do it because you can actually just clone it without putting in a password. If you want to do read write access, typically this is what people use. They do SSH and they do a git clone SSH, and then git CLI is just a command line tool that I don't personally use it, but maybe it's a faster way of connecting with GitHub. And then you can also just download the source code, which I do sometimes. So sometimes I'll just download this and open it up. But in this scenario, I want to do code spaces. So I'm going to say new with options, and I'm going to pick a big one here and go ahead and open a code space. So because there's nothing going on here, it's going to launch super quick, and it's going to load the default environment for GitHub. Okay, so the next thing to pay attention to is, well, like what do I want to do inside of a template? And in my opinion, one of the best things to do, especially if you're working with a language like the scripting language, is to create a makefile and actually move things around a little bit with a makefile. So what I would recommend is to do that first. So go ahead and say touch, makefile like that. So create a makefile. And in fact, we can just copy a makefile from another project that I did before. So this is what I typically do: is I either use a template or I will basically copy some code from another location. So I actually have a Python template right here that I think is pretty reasonable, but I'm just going to copy some stuff so that I can show the process of how to create something from scratch. So we'll go through here, and then we'll put this into the makefile, and let's just see the different steps here. And the different steps are testing, right? So I usually have installation, I have testing, I have formatting, I have linting, I lint containers, I refactor the code. If I'm going to do a deployment, I would do a deploy here, and then I'll put it all together. So I find in most Python projects, even production projects, right, because this would handle that case, these steps are very commonly used. And I think it's a pretty good strategy to use this. The other thing that I typically do is I will create a requirements file like this. If we go to this other project that I have the template, I can just copy one of the requirements files here. So you can see here that basically, I just put a few common libraries that I use, and I put them into this requirements file, and they're pinned. So the idea with a pin of the version number is so that these are known good configurations. Now you could unpin them, update the versions, and then repin them again. That's a very common operation, but since these are pretty recent, I pinned it. I know that they're probably good. The The only other thing that's optional that you may or may not want to do is to have some kind of a virtual environment. It seems like things are headed towards not having to have a virtual environment, in the future, but it's something that you can or cannot do. It's up to you. But I would say one of the ways that you could solve the virtual environment problem, though, is to again copy, maybe make some kind of a template. Now the other thing that I will, but I might as well just create one real quick. Let's just create a virtual environment. We'll say Python. If I say Python, yeah, Python 310. So if I say Python -m env, that's how you create a virtual environment in Python. I personally think if it's in the standard library, you should at least evaluate it, whether you want to use it first. And if it solves your problem, then you should stay with that. Some people don't want to use anything in the standard library. Personally, I don't get that, but I'm a huge fan of the Python standard library. So next up, what we could do is we could actually source this file automatically by just editing. We could edit the bash RC here, and we could just say source virtual environment. And then from here, we just say source tilde env bin activate. And then if I just open up a new shell, we have a Python virtual environment. So this typically is a pretty reasonable approach, right? You just one and done. You never have to mess with it again, and you got a Python virtual environment. And then to install your code is pretty simple. You just say make install. It's like that. So a couple of the things that we can do, though, that are unique to GitHub code spaces. One of the things that we can do is that we can customize our environment. And so how would we do this? Well, there's a couple different ways to do it. One is through extensions. You can see this was one of the extensions that was loaded. And the other one is through the dev container system. And so if I go to Shift Command P and I say dev container, dev container, and say configure dev container features or add dev container configuration files, this will actually walk me through how to actually set up my own customized container configuration environments. Now, there's a bunch of different ways that you could do this. And if we type in Python, for example, one of the things that we could look at is we could look at the different options. We have, develop Python applications. Here's Python and Postgres. There's also mini Conda, all this. I'm not a fan of Conda personally, but other people are. There's also Azure Machine Learning. But I would say these would be reasonable. Or the other thing you could do is just say universal right here. And look, this is the default dev container. I think this is actually a good approach for many people. Let's go ahead and select it. And then you can choose if there's other things you want to install. So for example, do you want to install the AWS CLI, or do you want to install, other tools inside of here? And they all show up here as different things to put into your ecosystem. I don't see anything this might be good. Actually, how to lint is actually kind of a cool tool because it lints your Docker file. I think that's a good one. Let's see if we can find any other ones. Like that's actually kind of cool. You can install Hugo automatically. Yeah, let's try that. Let's do that because I actually am a huge fan of Hugo, and which is a static website generator. And let's see if there's any other things that we want to install. Maybe I would say Kubernetes. Like if you're going to do development work, this might be a good one to install, right? Because you can install Minikube and anything else here that we would care about. MyPy, not a fan of that. And anything else? Pre-commit. installs the provided version of Python as well as pipx and other utilities. Jupyter Lab is conditionally installed. Huh, interesting. So, I mean, I don't know what this one does actually. It's kind of interesting, but let's go for it. Let's get experimental here a little bit. And then what else can we install? If you were going to publish Python packages, this might be an interesting one to install, this Twine here. Although I think probably doing it via GitHub, or sorry, the requirements is probably better. There we go. So it's going to add all these files, and now we can take a look at this, and you can see, in fact, we're adding these features that are available from GitHub. So they're probably going to be pretty high quality features. So that's a good idea to use those. And then the other thing that I think, if you're going to customize your environment, to pay attention to would be extensions. And I think I would say Copilot, definitely for me at least, is something I really like. And I like to use the bleeding edge one. And then also Copilot Labs, which allows you to do code translation. So I think these two are pretty good. And I would recommend them. And I think that's probably the ones that I care about, right? Is we have Copilot, we have Jupyter stuff here, and now what I can do, and we have Docker. So if I say add to dev container JSON, this will keep track of it. So if I build it in the future, it'll be very fast. So if I just go through here, I can just add all those to dev container. I don't know if there's a faster way to do this other than one by one, but we can just do this. There we go. We can do this. There we go. So now that we have those loaded in the dev container, we can see, look, these are all loaded right there, right? So we have the features, and then we have the customizations. The other thing that you could do as well is you could actually have like a container file and do all kinds of tricky stuff in there. But really, we don't necessarily need to do that. I could take a look though at my template file and see if I did anything tricky for dev containers. And let's take a look here. We have this. I do have a setup. What does my setup do? So you could actually add your own setup files like this. You could say home space. Like you could automatically source a virtual environment. I think because I don't know if we even need to do virtual environments anymore, because of the fact that that dev containers, I believe, just has a good Python setup, and it's essentially isolated from the beginning. So we may not even need to do that anymore. But I guess I'm going to just try this and say git add .dev container, git add makefile, git add requirements, and we can say commit adding elements setup. Okay. Now that that's set up, we can also rebuild our container. So we can just say rebuild, full rebuild container. And this is actually going to rebuild our container. Now, while this is rebuilding, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to this GitHub template here. Now that it's got this file here, I can actually go to settings, and I can go to code spaces, and I can say set up pre-build. So this will be me in the future that someone would be able to launch this, or I would be able to launch this very fast. And if we just manually trigger this real quick, this should allow us to launch again very, very quickly. And if we go to here's CodeSpace pre-builds here. And if I go here, create status badge, I can copy this status badge, and this will show essentially the version, or let people know, and me, if CodeSpaces is actually successful in being pre-built, right? So there's nothing so far, but it'll show me in the future if it's how well it's doing. And if we go back here, we can look at the logs and we can see it's going to take a while. It's going to take a while. So that's why you want to do the pre-build. Is once you've customized all this stuff, it's going to take a while to install this, like because it's got to install Hugo, it's got to install Kubernetes and Minikube, which probably is pretty extensive. It's going to compile some stuff for Python. It's going to install this linting tool for containers. And then it's going to install these extensions, all of these things here. So it could be like a lengthy process to build this thing. And so that's again why the dev containers are so good, is that they allow you to basically leverage that power. And if we look at the runs here, we can take a look at this one right here, the development status, and we could also see, this thing running and doing the pre-build process. And then we also have the one that's up here, which is the one that we're going to use just for our development environment. So other than this, the other thing that I think is worth making sure you're using with GitHub when you first start off is to use GitHub Actions. So since this is going to take a little bit to spin up, let's talk a little bit about GitHub Actions. So what is GitHub Actions? The idea with GitHub Actions, if we said new workflow here, is that you can set up automated things to occur. So you could, build projects, you could do deployments automatically to, let's say, Amazon ECS, you could do security analysis. There's all kinds of different things that you could do. You could build static web pages as well, which is kind of cool. In general, what I use this for is to do continuous integration. So if we go through here and we see how it says GitHub Template, GitHub Workflows, let's go ahead and start to create a template here. So I'm going to, again, copy something I've set up earlier by going to GitHub. And we maybe even want to rename it the same thing. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to rename this CI/CD. We can differentiate between the kinds of jobs that we run. And let's just take a look at what this would do. So this would do, you would run it on Ubuntu latest, and it would first install the packages. It would lint the packages. It would test the packages. It would format the code and do deploy. Now, one thing that is interesting here is if you wanted to, you could change this to be your pre-built container. So this is just generic Ubuntu, but I could test my code against the exact dev container that I've got built locally. So it kind of depends on what it is you're trying to do. So let's go ahead and do this. And if I say start commit, it's also going to start a separate job for doing continuous integration. We can see that one's queued right here. And if we click on it and we go to here, we can also create a status badge for that. So we can have a status badge for continuous integration, and we also can have a status badge for code spaces. So let's throw that one there. And we should be able to see, I don't know if they have to be queued, if only one can run at a time. Oh, no, it's in progress. Here we go. Let's try that one. And let's see here. So it's first going to install the packages. There we go. So what's nice about doing continuous integration is it's less work, right? Because you're going to get tools that automatically test whether you install your packages. You're also going to check whether the code is linting properly. And look, we have an error here because there's some libraries that don't exist. So this is perfect, actually, because I can just go in here and fix this. So if we go back to this environment, once this thing is done, it should be pretty easy to fix this broken build system. Because again, there we go. Codespace's pre-builds is failing, which is weird. But then also the continuous integration is failing as well, because we have we actually don't have some libraries inside of there that I was trying to lend something that didn't exist. So this should take just a second here. I see. So it says it's setting up Python 3.8 virtual environments, which is definitely interesting because I was already running Python 3.10. So I don't know why I would use Python 3.8, but so hopefully that finishes pretty soon. And if I go back here, we go to code space pre-build. It's still, so you can see it takes about 7 minutes to do the pre-build. So it can take a while. And that's why it's a good idea to use the pre-build process, right? Because let's see here. Yeah, 7 minutes in progress. So you don't want to wait 7 minutes every time you launch a code space. You would like it to build once and then use it again. So hopefully this finishes pretty soon here, and we can get started. I believe though the template, creating the template, we could look at the code, take a look at this. There we go. Installing Python tools. So it looks like the Python GitHub tool installs a version of Python 3.8, which is kind of interesting because that's a little bit of an old version of Python. I think the latest version of Python, if we look at this, if we go to python.org, is it 3.11? Yeah, 3.11. So not sure why they're installing one that old, but we'll see in a second. And then if we go back to this thing, we could also take a look at the build process. You can see it's still 8 minutes in. It takes a while to build this whole thing. I don't know what Python tools they're installing here too. So I guess that's kind of interesting. We might be able to find it if I go to GitHub and I look at the different install tools. Maybe they have one that would be easy to find. I guess I could look at GitHub, code spaces, CLI, install. So we could probably find out what packages they're using inside of here. I don't know where they keep the source code for it, but here's kind of interesting. This is GitHub haikus for code spaces, a quick node project for demoing it. So I think it's always a good idea to take a look at some of their. I'm going to follow GitHub, then I can see all the different things that they're actually building. They probably have lots of fun stuff in there. So yeah, it's still installing these Python tools. I guess I could look at look for Python. What do they got? So they have COVID-19 dashboard, Snakebite, OctoKit. I don't see anything. We could also look at code spaces. What do we see here? Code space Flask, code space Rails, Preact. This looks interesting. This was updated yesterday. So we could also see, let's star that one so I can take a look at it later. Might be interesting to look at their ideas. So they got this one, dev container. So they're using Universal but look, they're using Universal 2, which is interesting. So okay, we're finally up in business here. So I don't think I need virtual environment, but let's see. So if I do make install, what happens? Go through here, and we can get all this stuff installed again. So one of the things that I would want to do is add a Docker file to this so that I could basically pre-install packages and things like that. But that appears to work. And then if I do make lint, the lint module name pylint. So actually, this could be an issue because I did install pylint. So I think we do need the virtual environment here. And so if I say source -rc, what happens? See, there are some things that I did before in my old version of the template, I think that are good ideas to copy. So one of the things I did was that under dev containers, I actually had this Docker file. So let's go ahead and copy this and let's make our own Docker file. And we'll go here. We'll say touch Docker file. No, we'll say touch.dev container Docker file. But what you can do by doing this is you can tweak things even more. So we can say, look, this is the container I want to use, and then I want to do some updates like that. And then what I might want to do is, I think the Python was a mistake to install this. I'm going to get out of it. And I'm also going to look at this and see that I create a Python virtual environment here, which is kind of nice. And then the other thing I did before, which is kind of cool, is that I was creating a setup file here that actually sources the code space. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's just say, grab this, and let's just say touch setup.sh. I'm just going to build that to basically activate the virtual environment automatically right here, because I install this in the Docker file. So I think this is a pretty good pattern to do. And then the only other thing I have to do is, if I go back to this Python template that I had set up earlier, notice that one of the things that I do is that I do this. I basically say, well, what we could do, why don't we just copy this? This is probably better. I'll just copy this thing. And I'll go to dev container here. We'll just get rid of this. Let's just basically copy with this. And you can see it's the same kind of extensions. I have some other configurations here. And now the only other thing I would need to do is fix this makefile. So it says lint. Well, we don't have anything linting, so I'll comment that out. We don't have any tests. Comment that out. And if we say make format, let's see, does it do anything? So, well, first of all, it's not installed. So that's an issue. But if I wanted to create a virtual environment real quick, and then say source it, that's, I did make install now. Now I can put the code in the virtual environment. You can see it. If you don't use a virtual environment, just weird stuff happens with Python. So I think it's better to just do the automatic virtual environment setup here, like I'm doing. All right, so we got this cooking here. And then if I do a lint or format, no Python code, I could just add one. So let's just make a Python file called hello. And we just say prints world. We can just say make formats. And then now we could change the lint to just to be only for this. There we go. So now our code should probably work. If I put this into the build system, git add.dev container, git add file, git add anything else. Initial project. So I think this is a pretty good setup for day one of using GitHub. see some of these ideas. Let's do this. Then you publish. Yeah. So if we go back here and we go to this environments in the future, once this thing builds, either these should turn green. And the other thing I can do here is I could also say template repo, and then this lets other people use this as a template. So that's all I need to do. And I think this is a good setup. In a couple weeks, I will continue to build on this and do other cool things with GitHub.